It's time to gather loved ones together for all the holidays' best spread. Lynn's has great prices on all your favorite Thanksgiving items, from delicious turkey with all the fixings to mashed potatoes and yummy pies. We have everything you need to create your perfect Thanksgiving dinner. Whether it's cooking the traditional meal, completely store-bought, or a combination of both, your best holiday meal starts here. Learn more and start shopping today at linsgrocery.com. Lynn's, where delicious begins.
The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and don't reflect the official policy or position of the podcast. Any of the, quote, fire content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are the opinion and are not intended to malign a religion, a group, a club, an organization, business individual, anyone or anything, unless, Sarah?
You're a douchebag.
Yeah. We're not doctors, psychologists, therapists, licensed counselors, or shamans, even though you kind of think you are sometimes.
I'm like an urban shaman. Okay. Good talk. Hey everybody, Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, a.k.a. Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
a.k.a. ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story, we met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So it's 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM. Still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to it, my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back to A Little Bit Culty.
What do you remember about 1984, 1985?
Well, I was 7, and I remember Cyndi Lauper, and I remember Big Bangs, and I remember the wave in my hair. How about Live Aid? Does that ring a bell?
It does. We Are the World. Springsteen with the Born to USA. Van Halen.
There were some key elements of that era as a child growing up.
And Reagan's voice.
What?
Ronald Reagan's voice was like the soundtrack to my youth.
Yeah, I was Canadian. I mean, I am a Canadian.
You still are Canadian.
You could say that Live Aid, though, was the Gen X's first consciousness shifting media event. It's like, with We Are the World and the star-studded spectacle of all these mega legends, and it was all put together in service of a higher mission of saving children's lives. Live Aid didn't just give us an iconic pop culture moment, it also did real good. It did some real good, raised millions of dollars for famine relief in Ethiopia, and drew around 1.5 billion television viewers.
That's a lot of people, Sarah. And it so happens that one of these people that tune in to the star-studded broadcast is our guest today. So what does it all have to do with cults?
Or in Tina Turner mode, since everyone loved my Dolly Parton rendition. What's cults got to do with it? What's Live Aid got to do with your podcast?
Wow.
Sorry. I just secretly want to be a rock star. Okay. Is it just a tangent? We swear. Here's what it's got to do with it. Cathrine Moestue, our honored guest today, was 19 years old at the time of Live Aid, and she'd recently moved away from home to study at a theater school in Sweden. There in Stockholm is where Cathrine met a teacher of English and moral philosophy coursework who claimed to have a program to save the hungry children. That's a quote.
Slowly but surely, Cathrine was seduced by the teacher's rhetoric, recruited, and ultimately radicalized into the totalitarian group he led. She even changed her name to Roxy and became fanatically concerned with saving the world. Sound familiar, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't change my name, but so far it's sounding all too familiar. Wait a second. I did change my name. I was Proctor Edmondson, Senior Proctor Edmondson, as I became a green sash. Barfarama.
Cathrine became isolated from family and society for nearly 7 years before she finally managed to escape in 1992.
Today, she's a clinical psychologist who specializes in emotional focus therapy, and she's an expert on social influence. She's also a collaborator for the #IGotOut movement, and here's some cult academia street cred for you. By the time you hear this episode, she'll have recently brought the house down at the International Cultic Studies Association Mental Health Series, where she presented a lecture on the topic of shame in cult recovery. That'll be in the show notes.
But you don't get from Stockholm in 1985 to being featured at the International Cultic Studies Association's events without going through some serious bajs. That's Swedish for poop, by the way.
Maybe.
We don't have a great fact-checking system, but we're working on it.
Cathrine is actually currently writing her autobiography, Who Was Roxy? Can't wait to read that. And we're chatting with her today about her journey from Live Aid to Stockholm to Roxy and back, and what she wants you to know about shame in cult recovery, the 6 principles of influence, and the pluses and minuses of radical identity change. We've got lots to talk about it, so let's get to it. A little bit culty listeners, here's our chat with Cathrine Moestue. Welcome, Cathrine, finally, to A Little Bit Culty.
Finally. Thank you. Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
Thanks for coming.
So nice to have you here. Such a pleasure. We've been in touch for a while now, but your story is just recently been on the cover of Norway's biggest, is that a magazine or a newspaper?
Both.
Both.
Yeah. On Saturdays, there is a magazine attached to the newspaper.
You were on the cover of this with your story. What is that like, and how are you doing right now?
Oh, that's a big question. Well, I think I'm doing really good. I mean, just having the story publicly is really loads of shame. I can really feel that. And so that's one thing that I feel very good about it. And none of my fears have come to life. And also, like you keep saying, that these comments from strangers are so nourishing, so calming. And this has happened to me as well. And especially I've got messages from psychiatrists, doctors, like mostly women and one man, people who have high positions in society that are so ashamed about their abusive relationships or experience from previously. And what they tell me is that they lend strength from reading that article. And my God, I can't tell you how much that gives me goosebumps. Yeah. Sorry, my English is a bit...
No, it's great.
No, your message was clear, though. I think we got
Okay.
it. Yeah. And we relate.
Yes. I like Nippy and I were just saying, reading your story before this, that the content's so different. The time, this happened to you in the 80s, and we'll get into that. But the process and the language and the way that your abuser manipulated you is just so, we see it like every time it just blows our mind. And this is a particular.
This one's particularly with parallels. It's very similar, or at least how you put language to it. Some people don't necessarily put language to it as well as you have. I don't think. Sometimes it's still vague, but the way you articulate it was very similar to what we experienced.
It's so nice to hear you say that, because that's how I feel especially with the philosophy, because when we learn about cults and read, you can see the dynamic that's similar, but if the people are wearing funny clothes or, if there's some other religious thing, then that makes it a little bit different. And so learning about NXIVM also for me, that there was a sort of philosopher or he posed as a philosopher. I don't know which one is the right one to say, because in our group there was this, wanting to create an ethical world, and to be, that similarity.
The similarities, and tell me if you relate to this or not. I notice a lot of these things start with complaining about the world and complaining about the structures. And a lot of those movements are able to get, I think, younger people, because we can all go, yeah, these don't work, and I don't see a place where I can fit in or something like that. And normally an effective movement, at least historically, starts with an idea or a premise. And they're not really enrolling you into an idea. They're enrolling to you how bad everything is. And I think a lot of people are, I know I was. That was, I resonated with your story because I looked at the world and had a problem with it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
As opposed to there's some things that you can go in and you can enter an ecosystem and maybe improve. And here's an idea to get behind. So that one to me is what really jumped off the page in reading yours.
Right. And so they misuse, the suffering in the world, and then they pose as morally superior, and they have a great confidence, and that kind of moral narcissism.
Yeah.
Moral
Great word.
narcissism. New word
Great
for a
word.
little bit culty.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
start
that's
there. Let's
great.
start there. Let's
I
go.
love
Let's
that.
paint the scene because
I
Nippy and I
love
know
that.
the story, but our audience does not. Paint the scene for us in the 80s and the age that you are and what was going on in your life. I'd like to hear your story, but I also do want to focus also at the end on your healing and your activism now and your therapeutic work. But paint the picture. Where were you when this guy, and do we call him Jack or Cornell? Because I see two names.
I'd like to call him Cornell. We did that in Charlotte's book, and it's okay by me. But in the newspaper here in Norway, we called him Jack because they're to protect children, and some children have his surnames.
Gotcha. Ugh,
Uh,
those poor
Wow.
children. Okay, so tell us your story. Set the scene.
Yeah, right. So this is in 1984, which is symbolic, I think. I'm 19 years old and I'm leaving home for the first time. I want to be an actress, but I'm a little bit shy. So I don't want to go straight to audition for the theater school here in Oslo. So there is a fame school in Sweden, and I sign up for this fame school. They want to teach me to dance and sing and all that. And I thought, great, I'm going to gain my confidence for the audition. And forgive my laughing, but, that's just part of my personality.
No, you laugh as much as you want to.
Thanks. So the thing was the newspaper, there was a famine in Ethiopia. And a bit like the war in Syria a couple of years back, this famine was exposed in the media. It's actually the most exposed hunger crisis.
I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
right.
only,
We are
yeah,
the
I was
world.
only, wait, so 1984, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 at the time, but I totally remember it. We actually had an Ethiopian person that we sponsored
That was
named
huge.
Awa that
Yeah.
I wrote letters
Mhm.
to and my mom sent money to. Like I
Mhm.
remember he was a big part of the backdrop.
Yeah, right. And the whole world came together to save the world, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you had Bob Geldof and Do They Know It's Christmas and We Are the World song. And so I think most people remember this crisis. But the thing was, being in 19, being at this transition in my life, being idealistic and naive. I mean, let's not deny that, because I think that's normal to be naive when you are 19. So I travel alone. I come to a city outside Stockholm called Eskilstuna. It's a very small city. We are only about 10 students at this fame school. And of course, my dreams are big of these images from, I guess you've seen the Fame movie.
Of course.
Or
Another
Mhm.
backdrop to the
Yeah.
80s. I could totally picture that.
yeah, so you have to really go into that. And then I'm cheering on two of my classmates in a shopping center because they're dancing. And yeah, I'm going into how I met the teacher now. So there is a man coming over to me and whispering in my ear in English, I can need someone like you for my team.
Mm.
And my whole body reacts in a very strong way. I get goosebumps and, my stomach tightens and the guy disappears. And so it was almost like I've experienced something similar when a man was hitting on me. Do you know what I mean? It's like something totally unexpected, something eerie is happening. And then my classmate said, oh, no, that's just the teacher, it's our English teacher. And the eerie thing was that I knew immediately he'd been observing me.
Right. And how did that make you feel?
My body froze, actually. And so what happened was that my body was very smart. It's telling me that something is dangerous. Something is not as it should be. And later, when this particular teacher, Cornell, his name is, he was married to a woman, I'm not going to say her name, a very beautiful teacher too. And when this couple invited all our students to go back to their place, I was the only one who didn't want to go. But I went because all my classmates were going and I was new in town. I'm not going to sit home on a Saturday alone. And so it was that kind of pressure, it really did affect me, that comment. But when we came to his place or their place, he wasn't even there. Only his wife was there. And then he later came in because he'd been running, like, I don't know how, but he's gone for a long run. You could see he was extremely sweaty, and he went into the shower and he came out with only a towel around his waist and all that. And when I look back, is drama. He's creating this exotic, and he was an Indian looking man, very handsome at that. And so, the whole setting of this, you see things that you've never seen in your entire life. And he creates this aura around himself. And then that same evening, he started with the philosophical, starting to question reality.
How did he hook you there? What was the thing that he said to you that you felt seen finally?
Yeah, I love that question. I remember.
Yeah.
And the question is, can you think clearly, Cathrine? Can you think clearly? So what does a 19-year-old say to a question like that?
Yes.
Of course, of course, yeah, I can think clearly. And so he started then to show me, so how do you know we're not dreaming? How do you know that the candle on the table is really there? I can't remember exactly what I said, but I tried to, and I just quickly realized that I couldn't defend my reality.
Breaking down your reality. That was mind-blowing, because creating a dependency and also like challenging your reality, and he now becomes the holder of reality. You know that those exact questions were asked in Nexium?
Yeah, in our modules.
How do you know you're not dreaming? What is reality? Right? How do you know you're not a brain
Really?
in the vat?
Hard to answer.
The philosophical.
They had an answer. We had an answer. So we thought.
Yeah. But you know what? In reading the chapters in Far Out, which we'll put the link in our show notes, because your story is told as a chapter in Far Out, a book about radicalization, which we read to research this. It really struck me how you painted your childhood in a way that I think a lot of people will relate to, in terms of feeling not understood and and feeling very alone, and feeling like you didn't have the full attention. I mean, obviously your parents loved you, but they weren't like deep in your world in the way that you wanted, it seemed like, right? And then here comes this person who's like really seeing you and validating you and giving you like a purpose and a meaning, which God knows I totally get. And like, I see it so clearly. I have goosebumps, not in an eerie way, but in a, like, just to see the pattern in a good way. Yeah.
In a good way. Yeah, absolutely. And is it Dr. Ramani you had on the show? And she said that quite beautiful, when exactly that, when you meet somebody who validates you for the first time, and that is so nice. I mean, that feeling of being seen is such a basic human need, and it's filled right there and then. And somebody asking you questions about how you feel and what's been going on. And in a family with 5 kids, we were 5 kids in my family, lots are going on. And, just to have somebody interested in your emotional reactions to stuff, it was wonderful.
Interesting. Nippy's also from a family of 5.
Yeah.
We'll psychoanalyze him later.
Okay. I think you just did.
Sorry about that. Just, drawing parallels.
Yeah.
I think that we clearly see the hook and what brings you in.
Yeah, the ecosystem of what's going on in the world combated with the ecosystem. There's a lot of parallels that are pretty common in all these.
And the tapestry of your childhood, and then, what he's offering. But let's just like paint the picture for the audience. What was the group's mission? I couldn't really tell by the articles. What did the group do? Like, what was the day-to-day?
Right. So I think that we first have to talk about how he changed his identity, because that's really, because that hook is really just inviting me to become friends. And, and that wasn't for 6 months, or it took actually 1.5 years to create this radical Roxy.
Establishing trust, I think, is what he's trying to do. Yeah.
Right. Building rapport is another way. Grooming is another word for it. Yeah. But the trick is really becoming some extraordinary authority. After all this suffering, after we did that in class, so he was actually our teacher in class, and he also created an extra on moral philosophy that we attended, the 5 of us. And he also empowered me, because he said, you're so good in theater, why don't you create a theater school for children? And so I was and I had 2 jobs, and I was running, like, these are all important behavior changes, that I stopped smoking, I was running, I was feeling more and more empowered by this person, parallel to discussing the issues of the world. And so I felt, wow, this was really meaningful, which it was, if it had been true. But
Does
That
it
is
remind
so
you of
key.
anything, Sarah? Do you
It's so key what you just said. It was meaningful, which it was had it been true. Like that's just such a great soundbite. It's if it was true, it would be very meaningful. And yet it was not true. I love what you wrote. Meeting once a week with a few other students to listen to Cornell's moral puzzles. And that's like another way of saying, like, I felt like in our curriculum, it was always sitting to have a moral puzzle, like about whether it was about abortion or I can't think of the other hot topics right now, euthanasia,
It was any domain, really.
any domain. Yeah.
I've called it proactive daydreaming. You're just sitting there talking about things, but you're not really coming up with solutions. You're just having like stoned conversations.
Right. But like Catherine's getting ready for the revolution.
No,
right?
look, Sarah, weren't we in that same boat? Weren't
I know,
we,
but
like,
I'm just
you
bringing it
know,
back to Catherine. For the revolution.
I want to say something about those philosophical cases also, but let's first do the identity change. When he, after having built this rapport, he has a confession to make, but he's not sure if he can trust me to give it to me, the drill. And I'm going, of course you can trust me. Please tell me the secret, And so I'm literally begging for it. And he says, I'm not really who you think I am, So he said, he was actually living undercover in Sweden and that his name was Raoul Sandik, which is not a real person, surprise. And he actually came from Paraguay and that he was a leader of the revolution. And of course, this doesn't make sense to everybody, but it makes emotional sense, to a 19-year-old where you don't only have your best friend and a new life, but you have a really good man, wow. And because he answers all my dreams about the world, there had to be somebody who cared about the children because all we were reading was catastrophe, catastrophe, catastrophe. And nobody was coming up with any solutions other than sending food or money, which really didn't help the famine at all. But this good man, he was, it's a Jesus moment when he reveals his identity. And then he says, he's so scared. He told me this and because children could die if other people knew and if I would write the contract with him.
He's holding you hostage with your morality.
Right.
What does writing the contract mean?
Is that I would never tell the secret of his true identity.
Mm.
That's a form of collateral in a not so aggressive way, right?
Yeah.
Well, the collateral he held on Catherine was her secrets that she'd shared with him for so long as his friend. And like, sharing her struggles as a young woman and with her parents, it seemed like then he used that and flipped it on you. Can you tell us about the first moment that you felt humiliated and how that happened publicly?
Right. So it was in philosophy class. And so we were doing one of those experiments where we're traveling to the moon. Imagine you're traveling to the moon and then, or there's going to be a nuclear war and, only a few people can go into the rocket that takes you to the moon, so only like 10 people can survive. And so who do you choose? Who do you choose? And what do you bring? And so one of the things that I crossed out was that I wanted to bring a gun. And he just blew up in the class, a gun? How could you be so stupid? Were you going to shoot the Martians? Or, it was so humiliating. I'm laughing now, but it was just so devastating that I made the wrong choice. I didn't know what the fuck to bring.
You've never packed for the moon.
No, never packed for the moon.
What did he want you to bring? Well, green juice? I'd bring some green juice and some
Yeah.
coconuts.
I'd have brought a gun too, to be honest with you.
That's so validating.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. You never know about the Martians, right?
Yeah, it's true. Or who you're going with.
Hey, that's a good one.
So he humiliated you. And how did that affect you with him moving forward? Like, you tell me, what was that like?
Yeah, so I work harder, of course. But then the first time I was gaslit, that I can really remember being gaslit, is when he went to Copenhagen with one of the other students. And his wife called me and said, do you know where Cornell is? And I was, stuck with this dilemma. Do I tell her or do I, I don't say. And it was one of my best friends that he'd gone there with who later became his wife as well. And so I ended up telling the wife that I thought they were in Copenhagen. And so when he came back, he was furious with me and made it out that I'd told his wife because I was so jealous with my friend And my friend she was a really, really beautiful, she still is very beautiful, really beautiful woman who was also a film actress. And of course, I mean, there is some truth to my jealousy, who wouldn't be jealous of somebody who looks perfect, but
And also the time that he was spending with her, I think was also
Right.
something you were jealous of, right? Which I totally get.
It could be. Yeah, it could be. But it also was appalling to me, to my own morals. I just couldn't understand what's going on. And so instead of him saying, that was something wrong with taking a student to Copenhagen, leaving his wife, but, which was obviously the moral transgression in this case, it became all about me. And it was so painful and so disturbing that after that, I actually went home. I actually left school and went home to Oslo. And so that affected me in the sense that, I really didn't want to have anything more to do with him after that.
So after that happened, were you aware that it was gaslighting, or are you just aware that you were right in your stance and that he was off, or did you make what he was saying to you true at all?
That's a very good question. It was just extremely uncomfortable because it was the first sort of long speech. I don't know if you recognize these long speeches. Yes, a moral speech about, because this is also after his identity is disclosed, and I would have to understand that he cannot tell me everything and he cannot tell me the reasons why he's doing things and blah, 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 blah. And so that feeling, I just felt so much shame. The good feelings were sort of gone, and I just wanted to stay away from him. And so I bought flowers, and I go into the classroom, and I left it on the desk and took the train or my car back to Oslo.
This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories, the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
So, as you know, in a little bit culty, we always ask people, like, what are the red flags along the way? We've mentioned a few, the humiliation and the gaslighting and him turning his, transgression, his infidelity as a problem that you have. What were the other things? I mean, now you're an expert in this area. What are the other red flags that you missed as like key points?
Well, I think the most important red flag is that stomach feeling I had the very first time I met him. My body knew. And even before I had any therapy, before I read anything about narcissism, just after I came out, there was a question, if I died, what was there a wisdom that you would leave the world? And at that stage, I was 26 when I left, so around 27 years old, I would have said, trust your guts, So even then, I knew that my body knew.
It's very common. It's the most common. Wouldn't you say, Sarah? That's the most common response. People are like, initially my body was like, nope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple other things that stuck out to me was the moment, and this was also something that was said to me in Nexium in a slightly different way, but do you really want to be an actress in a world where children are starving?
Mm-hmm.
And I specifically remember like choosing between, it was like a Hallmark movie and some training. And it was like, do you really want to do Hallmark movies when like we're changing the world or something like that? Like it was this exact same thing. And you're just made to feel so awful and shameful about your career choices.
Your dreams get crushed.
Crushing of the dreams under the guise of
Nobility.
Yeah, I just want to say something because we've not spoken about the principles of influence yet. But we are talking about right now is both the principle of scarcity and the principle of consistency, which is is really a way to guide our feeling good about ourselves. And so we have a basic human need to feel good about ourselves. And those two principles are tapped into that. So we want to be consistent with what we say and do. And so now that you're doing so much good in the world, Sarah, how could you want to do that kind of movie? Or it becomes sort of self-radicalized, because of the principle of consistent, because we need to see ourselves in a good light. We don't remember why we were so engaged in saving the world, but we were. And so that becomes the place we become consistent to, rather than the old dreams and the old identity.
Right. It starts to serve our identity more than it does the actual thing that we set out to serve.
And the moral superiority, or as Eckhart Tolle, which was a very controversial episode that we had. But one nugget I got from that was that there's the collective ego of the group, which Nippy and I, had to totally eat that shit sandwich of that we did that. And that was a quote I pulled from the book, was Catherine's friends seemed bewildered by her air of moral superiority, right? Like that's such a red flag when people around you are like, who is this person who thinks they know better than everybody else? And that's part of the us versus them, right? Like you're the only ones who have the path. This is a path you've chosen. I was also really struck by how he isolated you from your parents and like had you call them and tell them that they were Nazis. I mean, how horrific that he would cut you off from them in that way. And also it's so beautiful that they stayed loving towards you and never cut you off, right?
That's so beautiful.
So beautiful.
I think to clear it up a little bit, maybe in my head, maybe for the audience too, is when you talk about identifying with the group, oftentimes, at least for me, it became aware to me I couldn't identify with anything that the actual organization or what I was achieving in the real world. So consequently, I had to go more inside and go, well, here's what we're doing inside if you come do the group or whatever thing. So it became more insular. And Sarah, I think I speak for you when I say this, because we had one foot out kind of in the external world, we could make those distinctions about like, we're not actually doing anything in this world, but we think we're doing something over here. And that became something that, Sarah, I don't know if I speak for you in this, but it became like, that's what I could hang my hat on, at least in my own mind. And I became protective of that, right? And then I looked at the rest of the world as like, well, I'm doing the proverbial Lord's work, if you will, right? I don't know if that's in line with what you experienced or not.
In feeling superior?
Yeah, I think that's what feeds it. You have to keep fortifying that perspective.
Yeah, I think part of feeling definitely did, as Roxy, I definitely did feel superior. Definitely. And it was also because of this, we became vegetarians.
Some people did. I mean, that was a lot of our organization, vegetarian.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and also I think that the health part was also a criticism against society that became more dominating after a while. He stopped talking about the starving children and sort of the health measure. We were looking really good, I have to say, to this day, that I think we did. And the feeling of endorphins when I was a slobby teenager and, just getting all that endorphins, the running, the feeling good, I sort of praised him for giving me those feelings, not my own body, And so I think that's what was also part of feeling superior. But how I justified it, I think it was a constant day-to-day justification. Whenever there was a doubt, I looked around and my friends were there and they all seemed to be okay with what was going on.
Right. It reinforces the choice. I know there's a lot of details with your eventual escape, but maybe you could give us the cliff notes of the first wake up and then the suck back in and then the eventual escape.
Yeah. And that's also something I really like to talk about.
Yes.
Because I'm so proud of escaping.
Yes, me too. That you're proud. I'm proud of you too, is what I meant.
Thanks. So we had a mobile phone. One of the first, the Motorola really heavy shits that, you carry around.
Yeah.
And he was always experimenting with control behaviors. And so he gave me this mobile phone and so that he could call me anytime. And I was alone in the city, with this mobile phone. And I go into the shop in Aarhus, actually Denmark. And this beautiful Palestinian boy is working there. And when I come inside, he said, "Oh, I'd really like to have coffee with you." And I'm just looking at him and I'm thinking, well, yeah, I'd really like to have coffee with you too. But I can't, it was a dilemma. I just can't. And I couldn't explain why. And then I left the shop and I was thinking, oh shit, that's, I was wanting to be rebellious against this. And so I go back and I said, I can have coffee, but we have to do it here. we have to have coffee in this particular shop. And he said, okay, I'm closing in 1 hour and you come back. And so if Cornell had called me in that hour, the escape would have been off. But I was very lucky. And so I go into the shop and we have coffee and we kiss. And that's extremely rebellious when you are saving the world. We don't have time for kissing, as you know. And so the fact that he did not notice that I had been so rebellious, because before I felt that he could see my every thought, my every emotion. I thought that he had soldiers everywhere. So I felt really hyper vigilant and surveilled all the time. But I had done something really, really naughty or rebellious, healthy rebellion, you might say. And then I come back to the group and they don't notice me. And that builds on the strength. And so it's like Cathrine is awaking inside. And so I forget that I'm Roxy. I forget which group I'm in because I got this so much new energy. And I wake up and I am going to deliver the mobile phone because it's too expensive for us to have it. And we all agreed we should give it back. But it was a Sunday. And so I actually wake up early and I just go to do the job and thinking I'm a good person. But you can imagine when Cornell wakes up and I'm not there. You see how forgetful I was, completely in my own in-love universe. And so I come back and it's not very funny what's happening because he sends everybody out and then he just throws me on the floor and sits on top of me with this big knife and he wants to cut out my eyes and, he wants me to watch. It's this moment where I'm just so certain that I'm going to die. I've never seen him so angry. He's never been that violent. And he's again mumbling on that nobody will miss me when I die, which I know is sort of true. Nobody will look for me because I guess my parents had given up by then. And so it's a strange thing that dying makes you come alive because something happened in my brain when I thought that I was actually going to die. That all the red flags that I'd seen over the years became like one story in my mind, like a flash. And I just knew he was a charlatan in that moment on the floor. And lucky for me, he did the same thing. He got up from my body, sat on the sofa, said, you have to stop scaring me in this way, blah, 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 that it's my fault that he's acting out. This usual kind of story. And I'm just going, sure, I'll never do it again, And I'm just playing along for a few more hours with the group. Before, when we're going to bed, I just realized I just rehearsed my escape. And so when everybody falls asleep, I do the same thing. I just sneak out, even though my heart is beating really fast. I'm so scared. I felt the knife in my back as I opened the door, but I just couldn't believe nobody woke up. And this is an old building and lots of sound. And so I just opened the door and I just ran. And I ran from this flat that we were in to the central station. And I took train back to that city of Aarhus because we were actually based in Copenhagen at that time. The guy in the shop, his whole family, they are Palestinian refugees. And they welcome me into their family, and I stay there for 6 months. And it's such a beautiful memory that I have with this very, very loving family.
I love the image that you wrote in your book, how you were drinking Tuborg beer, which I remember drinking when I lived over there briefly. Drinking Tuborg beer and smoking a cigarette, and the Guns N' Roses was playing November Rain on the stereo. Like the image of that with this family, I was like, freedom. Like, of course. Of course.
Little Guns N' Roses to free you up.
Yes.
Yeah, nothing like it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's like it's such a beautiful moment to reclaim your life. And I just have such a OCD stupid question. When you left, did you bring anything with you? Did you pack a bag? Did you leave it all behind? These are the things I think about.
I think it's a good thing to think about, because I left everything behind. Yeah, actually everything. But I didn't take the money. And so what I'm thinking is so weird that I still am pleasing as I leave the group.
Right.
I'm just trying to make sure they are not getting into any trouble. It's so weird.
No, I get it. It's not weird. It's not weird at all. I'm going to really encourage people to read the book for the whole story, just to backtrack before you got out. And I thought it was interesting that you were part of a trial and testified and he got sent away. and you were out and you were clear. This is before you got out. So like I'm just backtracking for a second. Just because I think it's important to note that you got out and there was no witness protection. Like the authorities didn't, it's a different time. This is the 80s. It's very different now.
well,
But
no one knew what they were looking at.
no. And they didn't know to protect you, to keep the other women from like scooping, because you were out, but then you got scooped back in for another 4 years before that freedom story just happened. So we don't have to get too into it, but I do think it's important to note that things have really changed. Has it changed over there as well? It's definitely changed here.
Yeah, so glad you bring this point up, because if you're going to ask me later what chaps my ass, this is what chaps my ass.
Well, tell us now. That's
let's
we
do
were
it.
going to
Tell us
ask you.
now.
Tell us now.
There's no rules on Chat My Ass. You can just come right out with it.
It emerges when it emerges. It's natural.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And so I was reading about the rules for prison systems just yesterday because I was preparing for today. And I also saw Cathrine. He is allowed to have a mobile phone.
He's not
in his cell.
allowed. They were snuck in.
He snuck
All
in the
right.
mobile phone, but
Okay.
he was allowed to have conversations with people for a long time. That's
Before
been
his
denied.
sentencing. His
Before
sentencing.
sentencing, yeah.
Right. This chaps my ass.
Yes.
And it also chaps my ass that because even during the trial, they knew that this Cornell had over me. And so I was allowed to testify without him in the room. But
Interesting.
yeah, so they did know, but there's no system in place. You know, like when he later is in prison, and he asks to call, they give him permission to call.
And he hooks you right away back in.
Yeah.
Ugh, yeah. That part of the story is really infuriating. Chaps my ass also.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's not allowed today. They have rules in place today to make sure that mafia bosses or cult leaders or manipulators cannot just call anybody at any time. And this is a really good thing for me to read and learn. The missed opportunity to save my sorry ass.
Yeah.
You know.
So what year was that when you're drinking Tuborg and listening to November Rain and you're Get Free?
Did it myself.
Well, it had to have been 90, 91 because November Rain didn't come out till...
92.
Yeah, there you go.
So
92.
I ran away in 92.
Hey there! Hope you're enjoying this a little bit culty episode. If you're interested in more long-form culty content, check out my memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
You can get it on Amazon or listen to it on Audible or find it at most bookstores in the, quote, total badass woman in nonfiction section, which is new.
Thanks, babe. I appreciate you. And now here's a message from our sponsors. Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. Hashtag cold pools, hashtag crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
So tell us about your healing journey. Like, how did you become a therapist? Tell us about the 6 principles of influence. Give us a download of like what you're doing now and how you got to where you are.
I love this.
Yeah, so first of all, healing my family, you mentioned before. I just need to say that because my family has been so loving, and so because luckily they're so conservative also, they stayed in the same house, they were still married, and I feel that that part of my healing journey has been very important. Even though I didn't get any therapy at the time, it got me back mobilized, for work. And so healing is a long journey, as you know, but I went to an ICSA conference in 2005, and Robert Cialdini is a professor in psychology. He's written a book called Influence that is, I guess, the most cited book on social influence. He was giving a keynote talk, and this was in Madrid in 2005. And so I write an email asking if I can do an interview, because at the time I'm psychology student. I wanted to write for the magazine. And he, in his email, he says to me, wow, you have escaped a cult? How on earth did you manage to do that? In my research, I learned that it's so hard to leave cults. And so I'm just flabbergasted, because it's such a respectful question to somebody with so much shame. And everybody else asks different questions. So why didn't you leave? But here is a professor, he's an authority, and he asked me this really respectful question. So I guess was the one part of my healing journey. And then learning about how the principles of influence, he gave a talk that was called "You Don't Have to Be a Fool to Be Fooled."
Ooh, that sounds good.
It is. And so instantly also part of my hurt was healed in that's just the name of the talk. And so learning about how these three basic human needs that we have, that we need to make good decisions, and that we need to have a good self-image, and that we need to belong somewhere, and how these three needs are exploited by charlatans and cult leaders. And when he's laying out, you use the tech in your cult, you use the tech word. I was just thinking that the principles, they come from 70 years of research. And Cialdini's contribution is that he actually went to observe salespeople and stuff like that to see, what exactly are they doing. And so this is sort of like tech. I'm thinking that this...
It 100% is, yes.
And I think that learning about them is a huge part of resilience, because in his book, because how to resist unethical influence is just so important. And learning about the mechanisms that are universal, they are natural, they are in play as we speak. The principle of liking, the principle of reciprocity, the need to belong to someone, or the need to have meaning. So we like people who are like us, right? And that is activated and amplified by people who are like me. And so when I watched NXIVM, I liked you immediately. And that sort of, is that good or bad, right? So we can start to think critically. Is that good or bad? And so in training for influence, you learn that to ask ethical questions, you ask, is it true? Is it natural in the situation? And is this a win-win situation? And those three questions I practice on almost everything, even in in a store. And they are from, I think, the 4-way test. I think there's some other businessman who actually made these questions, but I learned them from Cialdini. So is it true that I like you? Is it true that our stories are similar? I mean, yeah, we have evidence.
Check.
We have the data.
We
Check.
have the data. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it natural in the situation? And I think definitely there's not that many people who speak out about their cult stories, and it's definitely natural for me. And I'm so honored to be here with you today. And is this a win-win? Do you benefit, and do I benefit from the talk? And I can only answer for myself.
I think we do.
For sure. I have a question. When you look out into the world, you personally, what do you think is the most pressing thing people need to know with the way they're being bombarded with information based on your experience? Like, what are you most sensitive to?
I think you don't have to be a fool to be fooled, meaning that in a world where adults believe in QAnon or believe that Democrats are eating children or something like that, we certainly don't have to be shameful that we were fooled, by conspiracy theory. I think that insecurity, that if we knew that when we are insecure, we look outside ourselves for guidance. and that some people are really good at fear mongering, or they're mongering insecurity. And so whenever, oh my God, COVID, that kind of insecurity that we just had, that's a ripe ground for manipulators to influence us. And if we know about the principles of influence and prepared before next situation arise, we will operate inside our backs, in our spine, 2 questions. Is this a true authority? And what does he or she have to gain by telling me this? To always remember that our feelings can lie.
It's a great answer because it addresses extremes.
Extreme. Well, we haven't used the word that much. And I'm going to put a link to an interview with the author of the book, Far Out, about radicalism and some of the things that she put together from her extensive interviews. The thing that really stuck out to me was just the pervasive nature of loneliness, feeling alone, and one feeling powerlessness over being able to affect one's life and one's life in society. And I think so many of us felt that in COVID, no matter what you believed was happening, we were all alone. And so isolated. Thank God I had a family. I don't know what I would have done. And so many people, even though this is the golden age of cults and people are waking up, there's also so many people joining new groups similar to yours and became extremely radicalized on both sides of the political spectrum. And we had people writing to us about, are you going to do a cult about anti-vaxxers, and other people saying, are you going to do the cult about the people who want to vaccinate everybody? Like every side was the extreme of all of it. And it started to merge too with the vax stuff and the political stuff. And it was just
everything
so
got
extreme.
politicized pretty quickly. And the worst part about it is if you wanted to have a civil discourse in the extreme cases and you presented things that were challenging a certain narrative, people would persecute you for having not just what they perceived a different belief system, but there didn't seem to be an ecosystem for good faith conversations and civil discourse. And people were immediately setting you into a binary kind of way of being, which happened relatively quickly.
One answer is because we don't have all that time, but to read the book Influence, because in every chapter there is way to how to say no in different situations. And if we all knew, if people really know that it's not just that everybody is vulnerable to ethical influence, and I think that's so important that we know that, and that our minds are so busy now that it's so easy to be influenced by one of these shortcuts, that we really have to set a time to take a mental step back and think and breathe before we make decisions.
Our education is adopting to the new ecosystem now. I think this is what it looks like. We're having to learn that we have to have information overload. Our brains weren't processing information like this as quickly until the last 10, 15 years. And it's a lot to take in and figure that out. And there needs to be a totally new education system to understand the new world in a lot of ways. Or we'll have a lot of this.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is also one way to feel good about all the pain and all the bad stuff that we had to go through, is that actually being an occult is like an extreme, but the knowledge that we have to survive and to heal coming out is actually something that the world needs right now.
Absolutely. And Sarah and I have said this is the lane that's opened up to us. So if we don't turn our story into wisdom, we actually are helping people. And this is a part of the new way to take your story.
Wait, are we saving the children?
No.
Are we actually saving
No.
the children?
So you're making lemonade of your.
We're
Yes.
saving people.
Yes.
We're giving people more information to make more informed decisions.
Yes. Well, that's such good advice. It's such good advice. And this is like such good nuggets. A lot of our listeners aren't survivors. And so this is helpful. And for the listeners who are survivors, can you give us some nuggets about how to increase self-compassion after moral injury and betrayal trauma?
I can. First of all, shame. The shame has been the harsh inner critic. The shame has many faces, and it tells me that I'm a bad person, that I'm bad. Something bad happened to me because I'm a bad person. That's what the shame says. And so Roxy, as I was called in the group, and has been my sort of exile. She was exiled. I was so ashamed of her. I don't want to talk to her and remember her or anything. So I think that healing for me is really, meeting Roxy, going back to my 19-year-old, creating a safe space where I can listen to her inside my body. And I couldn't do any of these things without the help of my therapist. And so the most important thing that we do is to get a beautiful therapist. And mine has this beautiful brown eyes. And it's just the most loving presence that It's been so healing that she has been an empathic witness and holding my hand as I go back and remember what happened. And so that's one part of healing. But the other part is in everyday life where the shame attacks me. For instance, before I'm coming on this podcast, it's there, every time I expose myself, the shame and the fear comes. And what I do is I sit down, take a deep breath, and I stay with the pain for a bit. And I just know that there is some wisdom there. And I listen in, and often I use my hands when I listen into my body. And I listen to the message, and it's usually the same old stuff. That you are inadequate, you're still everybody else, you don't have anything to contribute, and I know that story so well now. And before I used to hate myself because I had this criticism and fear, but now I see them as protectors. And that's been so helpful because, these voices helped me survive the cult. It was a very smart thing to do, to subjugate. Of course, it would have been smarter to run away earlier, but because in my mind, there was no way to fight or to flee. And so the brain actually makes this decision to subjugate to the situation. And I became Roxy, a very pleasing, to the authoritarian leader that I had. And to understand that they are protective parts helps me create a distance to what's going on. And that kind of distance helps me to regulate down those difficult emotions. It's basically that if I'm driving the car, my protective parts, especially shame and fear, is in the back seat. And I'm always driving with them. They are here with me. They're probably never. But I just make sure that I'm saying, okay, I see you, you see you back there, but mom is driving and it's going to be okay. It's safe to talk with a little bit culty. I'm not going to be shamed or ridiculed on that podcast. So, it's okay that you are warning me, but this is not dangerous.
Oh, it's like a conversation with an inner child or a part of yourself that's there, but not really you.
It's also extracting positives out of those voices. Like, mine is embarrassment sometimes, like shame, embarrassment sometimes that, I quote fell for it and all that stuff. And there's something to that. And you have to figure out what that message is, I think you've done that.
I learned from a psychologist called Janina Fisher that the belief of unworthiness is not a feeling, it's a belief. And I felt that particularly powerful to understand that what would have happened if I had said to Cornell, you are hurting me. I don't want to be treated that way. What would have happened? Actually, I could have been killed.
Absolutely.
And so it was so smart to feel unworthy. It was so smart to subjugate.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Self-protective.
Yeah, and I did survive. And so learning about trauma responses in the body really helps us normalize and to see that it was a smart thing, that it's not and I think the principles does the same. It normalizes those shortcut thinking that when you look around the room and you see everybody else doing something and you automatically do the same, even though it's not a smart thing. It would have been smart if there was a burning building and you see everybody running. So our brains are designed to run when everybody else is running.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, given that it's true, a very smart thing to do.
Right. It's such a good nugget. I think every episode we do gives us another little tool like that. Certainly for Nippy and I, in this whole journey of recovery and coming out, that's what drove it. I was like, what the fuck just happened to me? How did I let this happen? How did I ask for, now we know I was told to ask for it so it wouldn't appear coerced. But, that drive to understand is what yields these conversations. And it's so important. And I'm so glad that you decided to do it with us and share your wisdom.
Right now, I'm just thinking about recovery and a very powerful question. And that is, how did that help you survive? If you have a lot of self-criticism and self-doubt, ask yourself, how did that help you survive? And reframing it as a survival response is really taking the shame away or turning down the volume of that shame voice and seeing also how shame is helped us survive.
For sure. Yeah.
Making notes of that.
And you're here now telling it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's safe now.
It's safe. Yeah.
You survived.
I wish I could high five and
Yeah.
hug you.
Yeah. Or cheers. What's the beer?
Cheers,
What's the beer
yes.
again?
Tuborg.
Tuborg. Did you live in Copenhagen?
No, I lived in Israel. We had Tuborg there.
All right.
I've never been to Copenhagen. I've never been to Norway. There's so many places I haven't been to. I was in a cult for 12 years is my excuse. But I'm coming to visit you.
There's a famous jazz fest in Denmark every July, correct?
Right.
Yeah. I've heard about that. Someone was telling me about that.
And in Norway as well.
In Norway.
Okay, maybe to come visit you. Actually, I have Norwegian roots. Edmondson is British and Norwegian.
All right.
So
cool.
I can come and explore my roots.
We stay with the Edmondsons.
I don't know if it's too late to ask these questions, but
Sure,
I'm thinking about the branding and my name change as something psychologically similar, something that really brands your identity and takes away your privacy in a way, like your true identity is really harmed.
Well, let me ask you, whose idea was it to change your name?
$1 million question. Yeah.
Right. And that's definitely been a through line we've seen with a lot of groups is people change their names. I was thinking I wasn't going to mention this to the outro, but I didn't have a name change. But in Nexium, as you go up the stripe path, I was Proctor Edmondson and then Senior Proctor Edmondson, which is similar to a name change, but it's, it's an identity. It's an identity. And then later really identified as a DOS slave under Master Ranieri. But anyway, what's next for you, Cathrine? What are you working on now? Tell us about where people can find you and all those things.
Right. So I'm going to give, what's next for me now is I'm going to give a talk on shame with ICSA and this is on this coming Sunday. So I'm not sure when this pod is coming out, but it's going to be on YouTube later.
Great. Well, this will be at least 3 or 4 weeks. So we'll make sure we put that link in the show notes.
Right. And so because of this article, I also got a book deal, surprise. There.
I was going to ask you, I'm sure somebody snapped that up.
Yeah. And so I'm very happy about that. So my book will be coming in a year.
Amazing.
Thank you. And then I have a private practice here in Norway and I can do Skype or I can do therapy online if somebody wants to do that.
We'd love to support you. We'll totally promote the book when it's out. I'm going to put myself up there to audition to read your book, unless you're going to read it yourself. If you need an English Audible, I would love to do it.
Great, great.
I did Yanya Lalich's book and my book.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I heard you do.
But I love that.
This is a great book.
And are you on Instagram and social media or anything?
Yes, I'm on Instagram and social media, and I still need to learn. So I'm very happy to receive feedback on how to become more social media savvy.
It's a process.
It's a process.
Yeah, and it's always changing too.
We can barely keep up.
All the new apps. Kids these days.
Yeah, but it keeps us on the ball. I just also want to say just thank you for Little Bit Culty podcast and just the Nexium season 2. It's so interesting. It's so educational and fulfilling to listen to your reflections. It really is so meaningful to me.
Yeah, and it changes too.
I'm so happy. And I can't believe I haven't mentioned this sooner, but Cathrine and I connected because of the hashtag I Got Out movement. So that's another thing that we're both doing. And is there anything you want to say about that and how that's helped you heal?
Yeah. I would never be able to tell my story if it wasn't for knowing that it's not my story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
It's my story, but it's not my story, meaning that it's also your story and it's everybody's story, that these similarities talking about abuses are so important to create a trauma-informed society and to create resilience against extremism, which is very similar recruitment tactics to cult tactics.
Well, we are on the same page. We're part of the hashtag Got Out. You have a friend and a supporters in us. I'm so glad that we were able to spend this time, and your story is remarkable. It is brave. Your whole arc is such a journey of compassion and resilience, like you just said. So thank you.
Thank you, Cathrine.
Thank you.
Sarah, I think we could have spoken with her for a long, long time, don't you think?
We say that with a lot of our podcast guests, but specifically Cathrine, I just feel such a closeness and camaraderie with her.
It was identical.
But that's the thing. When I first heard about this, like when she was introduced to us, I was like, okay, a cult in, Norway in the 80s. This is going to be a real departure, but it totally wasn't.
I mean, it's crazy. It's like the exact same profile, the same tactics, the same.
Yeah.
It got me thinking of like, could that be so similar in 2 different eras, 2 different countries.
It's like they're all friends.
Yeah.
It's like they have a private
There's
signal
like
group,
a
and they're like,
commune where they
okay.
just pump out these psychopaths, and they all have
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same, like, fuck, it's crazy.
And the thing that I was thinking about after she spoke about it, and I'm sure this will be in her book in more detail, the moment where she woke up and how she said she saw his anger and she like all the red flags made sense. It's because it's like when we realized, okay, Keith is a charlatan. He's not who he says he is. Everything, all the things that never lined up over the years suddenly were clear. It's like, we talked about with The Sixth Sense, and you find out that Bruce Willis is dead. Spoiler alert, sorry. You're like, oh, that's why he wasn't talking to her. She wasn't talking to him because she couldn't see him.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that all made sense. So that wake up moment was so well articulated. And I'm sure we'll learn more about that in the book and maybe one day the movie.
But also, she's great because she has pretty precise language to the abuse and articulates it in different ways where I got a lot out of it.
Yes.
It's good to know there's another person out there that's doing that.
And we mentioned a lot of links. We'll put them in the show notes. Please check those out. Please come join us on Patreon. Please like and subscribe. Write a review. Patreon, as my friend Caroline thought it was an alcoholic beverage. It is an application that you can download and get bonus content, bonus photos.
Patreon Lite.
We actually just posted some curriculum that no one's seen before. And I think if you're not following us there, you're going to enjoy it. So
Ass chapping.
see you there and have a great week, everybody. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Hope you liked this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet, sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred. True story of how I escaped Nexium, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife, and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.
It's time to gather loved ones together for all the holidays' best spread. Lynn's has great prices on all your favorite Thanksgiving items, from delicious turkey with all the fixings to mashed potatoes and yummy pies. We have everything you need to create your perfect Thanksgiving dinner. Whether it's cooking the traditional meal, completely store-bought, or a combination of both, your best holiday meal starts here. Learn more and start shopping today at lynsgrocery.com. Lynn's, where delicious begins.